Experience relativity.
Experience relativity.
Experience relativity.
Welcome to another episode of the Experience Relativity podcast, and thank you for exploring the space between us. Man, what I experienced in creating this episode is only a testament to exactly why this conversation is so necessary. About 2 weeks ago, I completed a marathon. So I'm 2 weeks post marathon, and I felt sore, invincible, beat down, confident, dead in the water, full of life, and most importantly, and most abundantly grateful. I'm so grateful for the fact that I was able to complete this marathon. Now, the theme for the Experience Relativity podcast for the month of March has been Get Wilder. Wilder as an acronym for What I Learned Doing Endurance Running. I want to shout out to Peloton for providing the 18-week training program that I followed, which I was only able to do 14 weeks prior to my marathon. But that's talked about in another episode. So if you want to hear why, just peep that. I also want to shout out Saucony because they are the brand that was responsible for getting me through that training program, as well as getting me across the finish line. Now, we have broken down this month's theme from two perspectives, the perspective of the enthusiast and the perspective of the indifferent. Whether you're an enthusiast or you're indifferent to the race of life is on regardless. From birth, the clock was started, and it is inevitable that you and the finish line will cross paths. Now, you can be consciously running a race towards it and making the most of this life, or you can let the finish line chase you. But either way, you're going to cross paths. Now, through the process of the race of life or a marathon, you got to remember that it's always you versus you. Now, today's episode is entitled Focus, and this is the third phase of pacing yourself for a marathon. Last episode, we explored patience and rhythm, and now we're going to explore focus. Now, if you've been tuning into the previous episodes, then you know what time it is. Let me... Story time. So, in today's story time, I want to talk about three things: math, meditation, and making a lawn. Now, when we talk about math, I've always thought that you demonstrated your focus and your understanding of math by being able to competently show your work. So, that's one place I chose to focus in math class. And it got me to a certain point, but I'll tell you in a minute when I hit a wall. Now, when it comes to meditation, I thought focus in meditation is your ability to clear your mind. Nothing. All. No thoughts. Clear it all. Nothing in your mind. If you were focused in meditation, that thought that's in your head right now wouldn't be there. That's what I thought focus was like when you were talking about meditation. Now, focus when you're making a lawn, which is a long and tedious process. I thought it was all about grass growing. You knew you were focused in making your lawn the best it could be is when the grass was growing. Now, all of these things are what I thought focus looked like when engaging in any of these activities. Now, focused is defined as an act of concentrating interest or activity on something. Okay, I hear you. Concentrating interest or activity. Cool. Each one of the three things that I talked to you about before, whether it's math, meditation, or making a lawn, I hit a wall in. And I'm going to tell you why. So, math, I can remember getting to calculus in college. Good old Dominion. Now, I may have taken calculus 3 times, and the third time was the first time I was able to get over the wall that I hit. Now, my focus in math, again, was showing your work, and it was all about the numbers. Numbers on pieces of paper, numbers showing your work. Like the focus was all on the numbers. But eventually the numbers got so complicated that I really didn't have a grasp on the concept purely from the perspective of numbers alone. So I hit a wall. And I was able to overcome that wall when my calculus teacher kind of changed his approach with the class, or maybe it was always his approach. Maybe he was just the third teacher I had that had a different approach than the others. But what he explained was the practical application of what we were doing. So let's say, for example, if you're doing parabolas and systems of equations, then you are figuring out like, what was it? Anesthesia. Like how much anesthesia you needed to give a person based off all of the factors like their body weight and how a particular anesthesia is metabolized in the body, yada, yada, yada. So all of these factors equate to a system of equations, and that's what the math was about. That's just an example of the practical application of some math. But what I learned is I was focused on the numbers, but what really helped me understand how to remember what to do with the numbers was focusing on the use. So it was a shift in focus, different perspective. Now in meditation, it was those damned thoughts. And I don't mean like curse your thoughts, but I mean, I was initially focused on clearing my mind. And what that meant to me was damming my thoughts like a beaver. If your thoughts are a river, building an obstruction to the flow of that river to stop water. Like imagine trying to stop your thoughts. When you do that, all you end up doing is thinking about stopping your thoughts. So you are thinking about every single thought that you're having and then thinking about stopping the thought, which just leads to more thought. It wasn't good. But when I learned that it's not about stopping the thought, and it was a meditation that I did on Insight Timer that was about it was about detachment, I think it was, but it was the idea that you're not trying to stop your thoughts. You want to allow your thoughts to stream, and you just want to acknowledge their presence, but choose not to engage with them. And that was a game changer for me. So it's not about putting in all this effort to create a dam to stop your thoughts and clear your mind, but it's allowing those thoughts to stream right through your mind without getting distracted by them. Focus. So, the making of a lawn. Now, for those of you who grow your lawn out there, you grow anything, but lawns are a particular beast because they're not natural. That was like the first thing that I needed to understand is that a lawn is not a naturally occurring thing. They require an enormous amount of work. Most people think that because when you see the beauty of a lawn, which is typically in like the springtime and, the summertime when you're outside and you're enjoying and all this type of stuff, the work of a lawn actually happens in the fall. Like if you're not working on your lawn in the fall, you're not going to win. So with this work that has to be done in the fall, most of the work is done on the soil. Now, keep in mind, what I thought was focus was grass growing. Then I found out that you've got to shift your attention from the seed to the soil Because if you focus on the soil, anything you plant in the soil is going to do well. But if you're focused on the seed and neglecting the soil, your grass is going to struggle. So just again, a different shift in perspective. So fighting these distractions. Focus can be approached in two different ways that I want to take a look at, and both kind of apply to the enthusiast and the indifferent. And that's the idea that to focus, you fight distraction, or to focus, you choose not to engage with distractions. Now, let's get into the first slant. The first slant is from the perspective of the enthusiast, and they typically choose not to engage distraction. And how do they go about this? Well, knowing is half the battle. Knowing what you want to do is half the battle. Once you know that, the other half is acknowledging that everything other than what it is that you want to do is a distraction. Now, going into my marathon, I set some goals for myself. So again, knowing exactly what it is that I wanted to do. So my bronze goal was to finish the marathon, and I had 6 hours and 30 minutes to do that. The silver medal goal was to finish in 5 hours. The golden goal was to finish in 4 hours and 30 minutes. Everything else was a distraction. Anything that wasn't helping me hit one of those 3 goals was a distraction. But once I reached a certain point in my training and I began to transition from the indifferent, like this is just something I got to do because I told my cousin that we were going to run a marathon after he asked me to run a marathon. It was just something I had to do. So as I shifted from the indifferent to a person who actually was enjoying the runs, or at least completing the runs, the distractions came to a point where I just had to acknowledge them and appreciate them and keep it moving towards my goal. Now, a good example of that is Rome. I love Rome. It was one of the first places that I got to go when I left the country, and it was like number 1 on my list of places to go. So that's how fortunate I am. I went to one of the top places on my list to go the first time I ever left the country. Rome is beautiful. Rome has a ton of history. Now, I thought it was a bad idea at one point that I arrived in Rome one day before I had to run the marathon. But in fact, it turned out to be a really good thing, because what it did was it did not give me an opportunity to get distracted when I was there. I probably would have went out. I probably would have hung out. I probably would have ate stuff that I shouldn't have eaten. And then it may have compromised my race. So focus is conserving your energy and then expending your energy in the right places. So me arriving at a certain time allowed for me not to waste any energy. I conserved my energy, and on race day, which was the next day, I exerted my energy in the right place. Another example of that, as it goes for the marathon, is the pacers. Now, for those of you who don't know, a pacer in the Rome Marathon is a person who is running the race at a certain speed. And in particular, in the Rome Marathon, they've got balloons tied around them with the time on it. So as I ran my race, there's so much to say about the experience of running this race. But as I ran my race, I was focused. I was focused on my goal from the very beginning. But it wasn't necessarily about the finish line the entire time. It was just about being focused on my experience while running the race. I'll say this and I'll keep saying it. The first run that I truly enjoyed out of all of the runs that I did in this program to prepare and the marathon was the marathon. It was the first one that I truly got to enjoy the entire race, the entire run. But reached a very meditative state in that, so I won't I won't act as if I was 100% like conscious of every step. It was really the state that I was in. So back to the Pacers. I get to a point where I'm 20 miles in on this marathon, and I realize that the pacer is there for 4 hours and 30 minutes. I have run the race appropriately to this point to hit a pace of around 4 hours and 30 minutes. They were in sight. And just because they were there, I never really had to focus again on that finish line. I could always look up and see a balloon that would let me know where I was in relation to the finish line and the pace that I was keeping. So I really got a chance to enjoy the journey and not just the destination. And that was a huge difference maker for me in this run. And that's why I say running a marathon is probably one of the first runs in the entire 3-4 months that I trained that I actually got to enjoy. The enthusiast loves the process. And I'll say this, they can also hate the process, but they love going through processes. The idea that going through the process kind of leads you to this place of peace where none of these other, like we talk about, none of these distractions, matter or impact you. And it reminds me of this saying that I've heard before, which is peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is knowing how to handle all the chaos and not allowing it to rob you of your peace. So as an enthusiast, you are not engaging with those distractions and you are not allowing those distractions to rob you of your peace. Now let's jump in on slant two, jumping back to that indifferent position. And this is the one I think is funny. I think it's really funny, and I know exactly what it felt like for me. So what I like to say is if the enthusiast chooses not to engage with distractions, the indifferent chose violence. Violence, violence, and more violence. Now the indifferent chooses violence because their approach is kind of like, I gotta do what I have to do. I said I was gonna run a marathon, so now I gotta do what I gotta do. And everything that comes as a distraction is either a threat or not a threat. Either it's gonna be a threat to me actually completing this marathon, or it's not a threat. And when you approach everything from the perspective of being a threat or not a threat, then you are in fight or flight all the time. Fight or flight. You are ready to confront that distraction and fight it violently, or you're ready to run away. And running away is not an option because this marathon is now something that we gotta do. So an example of that, and that's why I can say I can speak from experience, because when I was in the state of being indifferent to the race, everything was a threat. My initial runs, my breathing was a threat. The cold weather was a threat. Not having the appropriate gear was a threat. Those things were all threats to me, either training or not training each day, which was a threat to me completing the marathon. Now, when you're viewing everything from the perspective of fight or flight, threat, not a threat, it's all rooted in fear. It's all rooted in fear. But let me tell you something. Doing anything, look me in my eyes when I say this, doing anything is easy. The actual doing part is easy. It's getting over your fear of what may happen when you start doing it. That's the hard part. Gil Scott-Heron said, the revolution will not be televised. And the revolution will not be televised, in his words, because the revolution starts in your mind. The revolution that takes you from not doing something and just thinking about it to actually doing the thing, which is the easy part, is getting over the hard part in your mind, which is the fear of actually doing the thing. The revolution won't be televised because you won't be able to sit at home and watch the revolution for yourself. The revolution will not be televised because you will be present for the revolution, or it won't happen. You got to be present in the moment, or it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, when operating kind of from that indifferent space and that threat or no threat or that fight or flight, you are existing under the influence. And I don't mean like you sipping. I mean, you're operating under the influence of fear, and everything is from a place of fear. And it's very difficult to do anything that you want to do when operating under the influence. That was water, by the way. Now, what happens when these two cross paths? We've arrived at the crux. My guy, Alex Hermoisi, that I follow on Instagram, I came across one of his posts and I really liked it because it speaks to the importance of focus. And he said, and I believe he was quoting his father or his grandfather, one of the two, but he said, a focused fool will accomplish more than a distracted genius. Whether you are an enthusiast to the race of life or indifferent to the race of life, finding your focus is a non-negotiable for success at whatever you define as success. Now, you could take two approaches. You can fight or you can not engage. You can choose violence or you can acknowledge and accept that there will be distractions that are there, but you just have to let them pass and not engage with them. Or you can choose violence. But either way, you got to be mindful. You got to be mindful of your fears. If you're an indifferent person who is operating from the fight or flight perspective, and you have to be mindful of your goals if you're an enthusiast, and maintaining a balance, because your goals are important. And yes, focus is important, but you could also miss out on a lot when you are so focused on something and not able to kind of chill. So from both sides, you got to be mindful of the fear and you got to be mindful of your goals and maintaining balance. Now, I want to talk about the crux for me, which was the meditative state that I alluded to a little bit earlier. I went through both sides of this equation. I went through both sides of being, the indifferent and it being something that I had to do because I committed to it, to someone who, I enjoyed finishing every single run that I did in the program, right? But when I actually had to run the marathon, it was such a meditative state that I've reached from running. So I guess this is what everybody says when they talk about this whole runner's high or zen that you achieve. And I thought I was like flirting with it through the course of my program. We got married in my marathon. It was dope. Like I could tell you I could tell you so little about the details of the marathon I ran, like the scenery or anything that wasn't me being in the right state. I was so focused. I don't know if I have ever been this focused in my entire life on anything. This marathon showed me from my indifferent place and from my enthusiast position how much I could focus, how well I could focus. But without the challenge of this marathon, I would have never known that. I want to wrap with thank you. Thank you to each and every person who has listened, who has watched, who has signed up for the newsletters, who has shared an episode or any of the content associated with what we do. We do this to spark curiosity about the experience of others. We do this to support the exploration of the wildest territory left on the planet Earth, and that is the space between us. I'm sharing these things that I'm sharing with you because I need you to get wilder. Unless you want to go and run a marathon yourself, so that way I can learn from you. Thank you for exploring the space between us with Experience Relativity. Love you.
Experience relativity.
Experience relativity.
Experience relativity.